Shout out to G-Man Boxing. Where's the piss bottle? It's over there.
Introducing Amir, King Khan.
The Sky Wanker.
How do we get from an Olympic silver medalist at a very young age, turning pro to a lot of acclaim, to, after only a couple of years, signing a deal where all your fights from then on will be on pay-per-view, being promoted by Frank Warren, who at the time was the biggest promoter in Britain, world champion 140 pounds, arguably number one in that division. How do we get from that to a meme generator, people constantly laughing about his chin, just being, basically trolling the world? That's what we have with Amir Khan. Making silly statements, becoming a meme of himself. How do we get to that? I mean, when you think about it, what happened to this guy? How did we get to here? Well, I'm going to talk about it in this video. I'm going to talk about the good, the bad, and the somewhat bizarre world of Amir Khan. And in this video, we're going to ask the question, what the fuck happened to Amir Khan? As I so often do in these W.T.F videos, I talk a bit briefly about the amateur career of the fighter. Now, Amir Khan, his amateur career, he started boxing very early, right? And he was able to achieve a lot in the amateurs. I mean, he won an Olympic silver medal, all right? He won that medal at quite a young age. He was still a teenager, all right? So Amir Khan, to me, he showed several things. Winning a silver medal at that age shows two things. One, ability, natural ability. I mean, you have to be good to get to the Olympics, certainly to medal at the Olympics. And he was doing that at a very young age. This is not like someone will say like a Vasily Lomachenko, who's a two-time Olympic gold medalist. Very, very good fighter, extremely good fighter. When he was doing that, he was in his 20s at the end of the day. So he had a bit more, I'd say, life experience, which can help, because it can help build your confidence as you go along. It shows to me that Amir Khan, even at an early age, was naturally confident. You have to be to go in the ring against guys who are, as I said, the best amateurs in the world. Amir Khan was going in there and he was fighting them. Now, he did have a few jitters in the amateurs, it has to be said. He was dropped, and there's at least one occasion that we have recording footage of. I actually, funny enough, because I've seen it, but I actually couldn't find it when I went to go and look for it. Now, I know it's there because I've seen him get dropped in the amateurs. At the end of the day, no one really put up any serious questions about Amir Khan's chin at the time. There's several reasons. One, he was very young. Two, yes, it's not good when people get dropped as an amateur, but it happens to the best of people. I mean, if you look at someone like, his name escapes me, W.T.F. He was knocked out in the first round by Felix Savon. But he was, like Amir Khan, very young at the time, very green, and he went on to have a tremendous chin. So Amir Khan getting dropped as an amateur, a lot of people don't read much into it. It's different if it's consistently happening. Someone like David Price, who as well was in his mid-20s when he was getting dropped, it's a bit more worrying. Amir Khan, as a teenager, getting dropped, people didn't really pay too much attention to it. Now, when he turned over, all right, he made his professional debut on the 16th of July, 2005, so almost exactly 16 years to the day. All right, he fought a guy, see there on screen, David Bailey. Now, Bailey was out of his depth. His record was 3-4. He was knocked out in the first round. It was the typical Frank Warren-esque approach, just to get a couple of confidence builders. Amir Khan at the time was extremely young. Even by modern pro standards, very young. It's very rare you see, certainly guys who have Olympic pedigree turn over, when they're in their teens, essentially. And that's what Amir Khan did, basically. So he was very young. He had plenty of time to just kind of go through the gears, get his feet wet in the pro games. And at the end of the day, he amassed a record, where he was just beating guys who he should have been beating. Beating guys like Bad Casey, Stephen Gettins, Daniel Thorpe. Guys, as I said, he really should be beaten. I suppose the kind of real name that springs to mind here is Steffi Bull. We fought him in 2007. Steffi Bull was 24-1. You see there on screen. Amir Khan was able to stop him in 3 rounds. He was able to beat these guys in good fashion. People were talking about him. He was the fighting pride of Bolton. He was making a lot of noise. People knew about Amir Khan even before he turned pro. Obviously, as I said, he's silver medal at the Olympics. Good fighter, making a lot of noise, dazzling speed. At the time, at lightweight, certainly, he had a bit of pop to his shot, so he was getting rid of a lot of these guys. I think at the start of his career, up until he fought Steffi Bull, only 2 guys had ever actually gone the distance with Amir Khan in a pro fight. So Amir Khan was getting rid of these guys. The first real worry sign came in Amir Khan's first title fight. Now, it was the fight straight after Steffi Bull. Alright, it was actually, again, in July of 2007, and it was against a man called Willie Lemond, who was 28-1 at the time. Now, Willie Lemond was obviously Commonwealth champion. This was Amir Khan's first crack at a major title, and it was the traditional Frank Warren route, you know, British or Commonwealth, European. That was the traditional route. That's the way Frank Warren liked to bring his fighters. That's what Amir Khan went into. He stepped up. He fought Willie Lemond. The 6th round, Amir Khan had his first real crisis as a pro, as you'll see there. He was dropped, and as you can see, it wasn't exactly a flash knockdown. He was hurt. You know, Amir Khan, his legs did the dance that we've become accustomed to seeing now. At the time, I think a lot of people would have had a few eyebrows raised and thought, oh, is he okay? Now, he got through the 6th round, and then in the 7th round, he was actually able to get rid of Willie Lemond to the point where the corner at the end of the 7th stopped the fight. It's Amir Khan's first title. He is the Commonwealth champion. As I said, traditional Frank Warren, you know, road. It's the way he would go. Amir Khan would go on to defend that title. He defended it against a guy called Scott Lawton. Was able to stop him in 4 rounds. Another guy called Graham Earl. Very limited fighter was Graham Earl. Was able to get rid of him in just over a minute. You know, Amir Khan then he fought a guy called Garley St. Clair. And again, this was another defence of his Commonwealth title. Seemingly happy to defend that title, was defending it on Frank Warren shows. A lot of these Frank Warren shows, when you go back and look at them in hindsight, you see some of the names that were on some of these cards. It really does kind of make you kind of just makes you surprised, like see these guys and you see them now, or some of these guys have actually retired. So it makes you kind of realise, put it into context, how long Amir Khan's been around. And bear in mind, like he was still, I think he was only 20 years old at the time, you know, when he was fighting these guys. So Amir Khan, like I said, clockwork, defended his Commonwealth title, actually picked up a WBO strap, an Intercontinental title with the WBO. Now, obviously, as I said, he was promoted by Frank Warren, so Frank Warren was someone who had a very, very close-knit relationship with the WBO. Still to this day, you see a lot of his fighters fight for WBO world titles, Tricket titles. You know, Anthony Yard was in at number 2, having fought nobody with the WBO. So Frank Warren was able to get Amir Khan, you know, rankings with the WBO, fight for Intercontinental titles. His last defence of his Commonwealth title was against a guy called Michael Gomez. Now, Michael Gomez, at the time, in 2008, certainly had seen better days. Michael Gomez, who I believe is he from Ireland originally? He was born in Longford. So he was born in Longford, which is kind of like slap bang in the middle of Ireland. It's really small, there's very little in it. But Michael Gomez was tough. He had tremendous fights like against with Alex Arthur, but that was a couple of years back. At this stage, Michael Gomez really was a faded fighter. So people expected Amir Khan to go in there, blast Michael Gomez out with no real harm. Like I said, the guy had 8 losses, have had a very tough career, had been in some wars. Amir Khan was dropped in that fight, as you see there. Now, it wasn't as heavy a knockdown as the Willie Lemond knockdown, but nevertheless, it was still a knockdown. It was still against someone who Amir Khan, even in the first round, was very dismissive of Michael Gomez. Was really just trying to, you know, sit on his punches, get rid of him. But he had a tougher fight than many people expected. And at that stage, right, Amir Khan was getting hyped a lot. Alright? But the fact that he was getting dropped, like the fact that he dropped as an amateur, he was dropped against Willie Lemond. There was another fight which I actually, again, I can't find the footage of where he was dropped again. Now that one was kind of a bit more of a flash knockdown, but still, you had people, you know, like Jim White and Dark saying, you know, how is his chin? You know, Glenn McCrory, is his chin okay? Can he take world-class punches? I think Jim Watt said, one question we have about Amir Khan, alright, he has the flash, he has the speed, can he take world-class punches? Some people didn't know that. Now, at that level, right, when you see a fighter get dropped a couple of times at British Commonwealth level, right, if you want to move him up, as we've seen with several fighters who maybe don't have the sturdiest chin, there are ways to move them up gradually without taking much damage, all right? Now, Amir Khan, following on from that, it was announced at the time, I remember it well, I was in school at the time, and people, I wasn't as into boxing as I was a couple of years later, but I watched boxing at the time, and I remember Amir Khan, and I remember a lot of people in school at the time. They were all talking about Amir Khan. Like, the hype for Amir Khan was real. It was even over here in Ireland. People were talking about Amir Khan, you know, flash Amir Khan. And at the time, it was announced that pretty much all of his fights from then on in would be covered on Sky Box Office pay-per-view. Again, we look back now at Amir Khan, and when we look back at him, we kind of laugh a bit. But again, in 2008, at this point, he was still undefeated. He was about 21 years old. And as I said, pay-per-view. You know, people were talking about him. He was filling out arenas. People were getting very hyped about him. A world title shot was imminent. But as I said, when you've had someone and people question about their punch resistance, you maybe want to match them a bit carefully, don't you? Just, you know, you maybe want to say, okay, we won't fight a puncher unless we absolutely have to. Obviously, if it's a champion who's a puncher or someone like that, or a noted puncher, you know, we'll fight them. But if you have a guy who, you know, there's a few little questions about the chin there, you know, maybe you want to match him a bit, you know, bit with guys who can box, maybe not punch too much. So, what did the matchmakers do? Well, Amir Khan's next fight was against a guy called Breidis Prescott. Now, Breidis Prescott at the time was 19-0. Wasn't much known about him, except one thing. His KO ratio was over 90%. Yeah. So, as I said earlier, you have someone who has a few questions around the chin, you know, a few bit of questions around there. You put him in, you put him in there with a guy who has damn near 100% KO ratio. That was a interesting idea. Love to know who made that idea in terms of the matchmaking. Amir Khan defending his WBO Intercontinental title, you know, in that fight. A few people were, you know, questioned. There was a few eyebrows raised about that matchmaking. Some people were debating whether that was the right move.
Well, it's a fairly short debate, Murray. End of message. 3 minutes to go.
It was a fairly short debate. Was almost as short as the fight. Was it the right move? Hell no. Amir Khan got absolutely levelled inside 1 minute of the first round against Breidis Prescott. That was a damaging defeat on so many levels. Amir Khan was hyped up to the hilt. Alright? There was people really getting on board with him, you know, expecting a lot out of him, world titles, etc., etc. To lose in such devastating fashion, especially Amir Khan being so young, on the cusp of a wave of success, it wasn't like he even, you know, had a grueling fight where, you know, he gave as good as he got, but he just came up short, or, you know, he was winning the fight comfortably and, you know, maybe he just got It wasn't like that. He literally went in and was just blown out of the water. A couple of left hooks from Breidis Prescott, and the jabs. You could even see the jabs from Breidis Prescott early on in that fight were hurting Amir Khan. You know, you can see, if you go back and watch it, it's a quick watch, but the jabs were hurting him. Terry O'Connor, by the way, refereed that fight, and Amir Khan, in my opinion, took extra couple of shots that he didn't need. That second knockdown, in my opinion, should never have happened, because Amir Khan was absolutely out of it. Now, credit to Amir Khan, one thing he did show, which is something that he's shown throughout his career, is incredible heart and resiliency. Because he got up after the first knockdown, which was a massive knockdown. It was a very, very heavy knockdown, and a lot of referees would have stopped that fight then and there in the first round. And to be honest with you, I wouldn't have complained. Obviously, I didn't watch it live at the time, but watching the fight like that now, if a referee had stopped it, I wouldn't have complained. A lot of other people wouldn't have complained. Amir Khan was out of it. And, you know, saying that, when he got dropped the second time, try as hard as he did, even though he was completely out of it, he still tried to get up. So Amir Khan, for all his flaws, for all the things he says that are silly, for all the times we laugh at him, one thing we can never question about Amir Khan, even back then, was that Amir Khan always had heart. Right, he did. But then it became a question of rebuilding. You know, he needed to rebuild after a loss like that. It was quite a devastating loss. He came back out. He stuck around at lightweight, although at the time he was blaming the actual loss on being weight drained, you know. And then we had Amir Khan's next fight. Now, this was, again, Sky Sports pay-per-view, it was against a guy called Oisin Fagan. Now, Oisin Fagan is actually from, I think he's from Cabra, which is in Dublin. Now, he was a very, very, very limited fighter, extremely limited. Amir Khan got rid of him in 2 rounds. All right, it was a complete shutout. When you look at the undercard, you know, on that undercard, you had Audley Harrison losing to Martin Rogan. You had Enzo Macronelli, who, you know, Frank Warren was, you know, always very high on. You had Derek Chisora, Jamie Cox, Liam Walsh. So you had an awful lot of names who we would come to know in later years. As I said, it's crazy to look back at some of these cards to see the names that were on it at the time. I mean, Amir Khan and Kell Brook shared cards together, as many people don't know, because they did share, I think actually on the night Amir Khan won his world title, he actually shared a card with Kell Brook that night, if memory serves me correct. In fact, I'm sure he did, which I will get to now in a sec, because we're actually nearing the stage where Amir Khan wins his world title. His last fight at 135 pounds was against the great Marco Antonio Barrera. Barrera at this time seen much better days. Amir Khan won the fight via a technical decision after 6 rounds. Now, as I said, that was Amir Khan's last fight at 135 pounds. He decided to move up to lightweight. So Amir Khan's first fight at 140 pounds, light welterweight, was against a guy called Andrei Kotelnik. Alright, now Kotelnik was a known champion. He was 31-2. He was known as a good fighter. You know, he was a decent fighter. There was nothing to write home about, but he was decent. You know, Amir Khan went into that fight. A lot of people, I remember Jim Watt saying, Kotelnik's done it the hard way. He's very complete. And, you know, Kotelnik could do things in there. He was useful. Amir Khan went in there and on one of the judges' scorecard won every round. But it was not really that competitive. I mean, you could probably give Kotelnik maybe a round or two. Amir Khan went in there. He did what many people expected him to do years ago. He was able to go and capture a world title. Wasn't a lightweight. It was at 140 pounds. A weight in which he felt more comfy at. A weight in which he said he was no longer draining himself. Because that was something that Amir Khan used when he was at 135 pounds to defend. Specifically the Breidis Prescott loss. Is that, well, I was weight drained. And as I said earlier in this video, these old Frank Warren cards, the names you see on these cards when you look back at them. This was 2009. It's quite incredible. I mean, on that card, Enzo Macronelli lost to Denis Lebedev. Matthew Hall fought Anthony Small. A certain Ezekiel Kell Brook fought Michael Lomax. I remember that fight, actually, Michael Lomax and Kell Brook. You Kevin Mitchell, Paul Smith, James DeGale, Frankie Gavin, and Billy Joe Saunders. All names that we would all come to know in recent years. They were all fighting on these... They're not small cards. They were all fighting on Amir Khan's undercard. It's incredible to just to think that in 10 years time where most of these guys would be, that we know all of them. Some of them have retired. In fact, I think 3 of them have retired. Some of them are past their best, but it's amazing to think that a lot of them are still there in boxing. These were all on Frank Warren cards back in the day. Frank Warren really at the time was the boxing guy in Britain. Eddie Hearn hadn't come on the scene. Barry Hearn was still doing a bit with Matchroom. You had Frank Maloney doing his thing. Dave Colwell. At the end of the day, most of these pros who were turning over, all these prospects, they were Frank Warren guys. Frank Warren really was the man in British boxing. It just shows how much times have changed. Now, Amir Khan, his first defence of his title against Dimitri Salida. A lot of people didn't think that was going to be much of a fight, to be fair, and it wasn't. Amir Khan, first round knockout, beat the crap out of Salida. Really did. Next fight then was against Paulie Malignaggi. Now, Malignaggi at the time was still somewhat useful, you know, it had to be said, because he did go on to capture a world title at welterweight, actually, funny enough, 2 years later, by a stoppage of all things as well. I remember that. He fought, the guy who knocked out Ricky, I can't remember the guy's name, the Ukrainian guy. His name is very long. But I remember Paulie Malignaggi stopping him, which is bizarre. You don't see Paulie Malignaggi stop anyone. But Amir Khan went in there, did an absolute job on Malignaggi, stopped him in 11 rounds. Malignaggi had shared the ring with Ricky Hatton and with Amir Khan, and Malignaggi even stated that he felt Amir Khan was the better of the two. Now, me personally, I would have loved to have seen a fight between Ricky Hatton and Amir Khan. It would have been very interesting to see, because I think the styles would have clashed very well. Amir Khan was always someone who didn't really like pressure. He was not very good with pressure. And I must as well point out as well, at this stage, Amir Khan was being trained by Freddie Roach. Alright? He was trained by a couple of English fighters, or English trainers when he turned over pro originally. But by this stage, after the loss, he went over, started sparring Manny Pacquiao, started training with Freddie Roach over in Los Angeles. And, you know, by all accounts, he was learning a lot from sparring Manny Pacquiao. people say Manny Pacquiao dropped Amir Khan several times, which I well and truly believe, to be honest with you. I mean, Amir Khan's chin has regressed over the years. It has to be said, from the knockouts. But his baseline level of punch resistance was never really there to begin with. What I mean by that is, so you have Amir Khan, whose chin is, well, let's just look at it like this. Let's say this is Derek Chisora's chin pre-David Haye. After David Haye stopped them, we'll say it went down to there. It's still above average. Amir Khan's chin was probably below average at the start. So it's regressed over time in terms of it being dented. So I well believe he was stopped or dropped by Manny Pacquiao in sparring. But in my opinion, Amir Khan's finest moment, his best win, and a win that when we look back now with the benefit of retrospect, we wonder how this ever happened. Because he went on to fight Marcus Maidana. Maidana, certainly at 140, was a massive puncher. He was a massive puncher at 147, much less 140. Amir Khan had Maidana down. Amir Khan was always a quick starter. Had Maidana down in the first round, but Amir Khan started struggling a bit. You know, the pressure in Maidana was telling, and in the 10th round, boom. Amazing right hand. Massive right hand. I mean, let's just put this in context, right? Amir Khan has been dropped by lesser known punchers, by lesser looking shots. That's a fair assessment. I think if you were to say pound for pound, Terence Crawford and Marcus Maidana, you would say Terence Crawford hits harder. I think if you were to say, his name escapes me, what's his name? Samuel Vargas. If you were to say Samuel Vargas, Marcus Maidana, you would say Marcus Maidana hits harder. That right hand couldn't have landed any cleaner. Amir Khan was in all sorts of trouble, but he gritted out. He stayed on his feet. Let's think about this, right? He took flush shots on the chin for Marcus Maidana, of all people, and stayed on his feet. This was in 2010. Amir Khan, a lot of referees, by the way, in that 10th round would have stopped that fight. Make no mistake about that, because Amir Khan was in trouble. He was in serious trouble in that 10th round. But what did he do? He grinned and bared. He just bit down his gum shield. He got through. He was able to pick up a unanimous decision. It was close. Make no mistake about that. It was very close. Marcus Maidana had a point deducted as well in that fight, which did help. But Amir Khan got through that. And in my opinion, it's his best win. And in my opinion, you might say Devon Alexander's his most complete performance, but in terms of, you know, boxing, punching, being able to show that you can take a shot, showing heart, I don't think Amir Khan in many ways has ever looked better than he did against Marcus Maidana. Obviously his next fight then was against a guy called Paul McCluskey. Had a relatively straightforward performance there. Again, it was a technical decision. I believe it was an accidental clash of heads on McCluskey's end, which, you know, caused him to have a pretty bad cut. Went to the scorecard. Amir Khan won every round. You know, it was a routine title defense. Then he was able to pick up the IBF title, you know, which was a consolidation, which was unification against Zab Judah. Dominated Zab Judah. Was able to stop Zab Judah. This was the Zab Judah who, let's face facts, yes, seen better days. Gave Mayweather a very tough fight only a couple of years ago, and even then it's seen better days. But Amir Khan was able to go in there and stop Zab Judah, which, you know, was a good performance in my opinion. Now, it was at this time as well where Amir Khan started getting called out by Kell Brook, and they actually done an episode of Ringside together where Kell Brook was really clamouring for that all-British clash with Kell Brook. That was what Kell Brook wanted. Amir Khan, he saw himself as a bigger star. He felt that he had built his profile to such an extent that he was better in every way, whether it be physically, athletically, you know, from a boxing point of view, and a bigger draw than Kell Brook. So he was dismissive of Kell Brook. He gave him a couple of ultimatums: win a world title, leave Eddie Hearn, etc. That fight, as of now, 2021, I think at this stage now has it worn off? Does anyone even want to see it? In their primes, in around those years, would have been great to see it. Amir Khan was dismissive. We didn't see it. His next fight then was December of 2011 against Lamont Peterson. Now, again, Amir Khan, fast start, had Peterson down early on in that fight. This was a very contentious, controversial fight for several reasons. All right, Amir Khan had point deductions, you know, in that fight, which did contribute to the fact that, you know, Amir Khan lost this fight. It was in Peterson's hometown. Amir Khan, although in my opinion Amir Khan was hard done by in that fight, Peterson had a lot of success in there. You know, Peterson's never had the sturdiest chin, but Amir Khan, even at 140, not the biggest puncher in the world, his physical strength even at that weight questionable. Peterson was able to get over that little early setback from Amir Khan, in which I think the speed is the issue with a lot of people early on when they fight Khan, more so than the power. They can't get used to the speed, but once they get their timing right, once they acclimatise to it, Peterson was all over Amir Khan. This fight was also interesting because this was where the man in the suit was seen. Now, he was seen sat next to judges. There is no one allowed next to judges in boxing, and this guy was sat there in a suit, and to this day I still don't fully believe if he's been identified. He was just known as the man in a suit. There was a lot of controversy about that fight. Again, Lamont Peterson tested positive after that fight. Lamont Peterson tested positive after that fight. So it meant that, Amir Khan, yeah, he lost, but he can take solace in the fact that it was a very close fight. There was a lot of controversy about that fight. I believe HBO had Amir Khan actually winning that fight. And, as I said, tested positive. So Amir Khan, he got to keep his titles. He got reinstated. Then he had to defend against Danny Garcia. Danny Garcia, I believe, was mandatory challenger at the time. Now, Danny Garcia was seen by many as a good fighter, but a bit crude, flat-footed, cut a bit easily, didn't really have much to write home about in the way of punching power. There wasn't much to Danny Garcia, or so we thought. Because one thing Danny Garcia has, he's always had his arsenal, is world-level timing. And timing beats speed. Now, when you look at this Danny Garcia fight for the first 2 rounds, it is all Amir Khan. It looks almost as if Amir Khan is going to stop Danny Garcia. Seriously, it looks as if he's actually going to stop him. And then the 3rd round comes. Boom. Amir Khan gets caught with a left hook from Danny Garcia. All over the place. Managed to finish the round. Didn't even know where his corner were at the end of that round. Didn't know where he was. It's very rare you see a punch that knocks someone's punch resistance back to the extent that it knocked Amir Khan's resistance back, because he was completely finished after that punch, the first shot. And his punches, he never regained his equilibrium, never regained his legs in that fight. And ultimately, I don't think his chin's ever been quite right since that knockout. Amir Khan was ultimately stopped in the 4th round. He looked like he'd been 10 rounds with Danny Garcia and took a sustained beating. His face was in a state after that fight. He was beaten from pillar to post for those 2 rounds. That was a loss that was damaging. Again, you would even maybe say more damaging, not from a psychological point of view, but from just the sheer damage point of view in terms of career. He took a beating in those 2 rounds against Danny Garcia. Bad beating. A lot of people were questioning Amir Khan. What would he do from there? At this stage, he linked up with Virgil Hunter. Now, Virgil Hunter was the trainer of Andre Ward. Virgil Hunter was a great trainer, still is. Took Andre Ward from amateur to world champion. Very good trainer. Good at teaching defense to his fighters. Good at teaching inside fighting. Now, Amir Khan, originally with Virgil Hunter, we didn't really see the benefits of Virgil Hunter early on. Like against Carlos Molina, he had an okay performance, able to stop him in 10 rounds, but we didn't really see many necessarily improvements from Amir Khan. He kind of looked same old. He went to Sheffield of all places to fight Julio Diaz. The fight after, Deontay Wilder was actually on the undercard of this fight, and in that fight it was a very tough fight. Amir Khan was dropped heavily in the 4th round by Julio Diaz. It was a very, very close contentious fight, as the scorecards will tell you. I mean, they only had a round in it in one of the scorecards. So some people were questioning, what is Amir Khan? Is he finished? Has the Danny Garcia loss really just taken it all from Amir Khan? Has he got anything left at this stage? Well, his next fight was against Louis Collazo. Amir Khan spent 6 months training with Virgil Hunter, and it was in this fight that everything came together. He won it on points, but he bounced Louis Collazo up and down off the canvas. Collazo followed the approach that many would use against Khan, that he doesn't like pressure. He pressured with his hands down. We saw subtle changes in Amir Khan's style. Now, some of the changes in Amir Khan's style, when you look at some of his fights with Freddie Roach, he wouldn't keep his shape very well. And that was something that Virgil Hunter actually said he instilled in Amir Khan, was to keep his shape in the ring. If you look at Amir Khan, say like against Lemma Peterson, when the tough would get tough, he would kind of stand very upright. His legs would kind of almost arch together, and then he'd be just kind of running around the ring. With Virgil Hunter, None of that happened. He was able to polish Amir Khan's style up to the point where he was keeping his shape a hell of a lot better in the ring. And against Louis Collazo, we really seen that. We really saw improvements from Amir Khan. This was his first fight at welterweight, by the way. And this is for the vacant WBC silver welterweight title. It was in around about this time as well that Amir Khan started really going and trying to get a fight with Manny Pacquiao, but more so Floyd Mayweather, who was the pound for pound king at the time. I believe it was even in 2014 where Floyd Mayweather asked on Twitter who did he want the fans to see him fight next. Amir Khan was the pick. Amir Khan versus Floyd Mayweather, make no mistake about it, stylistically would have been fascinating. I would have picked Floyd Mayweather to win, but it would have been a very close fight. I think that Floyd Mayweather had the power to hurt Amir Khan, definitely. But like that, Amir Khan, the speed, the height, the reach, although I don't think Amir Khan would necessarily have the reach in terms of arm length on Floyd Mayweather, but it would definitely be interesting to see how Floyd Mayweather would have coped with Amir Khan's speed. It would have been absolutely fantastic to see. It's a shame we never saw that fight. I can understand kind of why Floyd didn't take it, but for me, although Marcus Maidana was very competitive in both fights, it would have been such an interesting fight, Amir Khan versus Floyd Mayweather. Part of me thinks Floyd Mayweather would have figured the puzzle out, but you look at Amir Khan's style and you just think, could he have caused Floyd Mayweather serious issues? Yes. Could it have been enough to take that all away from Mayweather? Potentially. Who knows? You know? The next fight Amir Khan had was in December 2014. This was against Devin Alexander. Devin Alexander was a boxer. Southpaw boxer. Good boxer. Amir Khan, on that night, some people have said it's his best performance. Right? As I said, I think the Maidana fight may have been his most complete performance, but this Devon Alexander performance was one of his best, if not the best. Amir Khan boxed Alexander's head off, won every single round. He looked lethal. And at this time, he was then mandatory for the WBC welterweight title. Now, at this time, Floyd Mayweather still had that title. It was kind of up in the air what he was doing. Was he fighting Pacquiao next? Who was he going to fight? Was he going to fight Berto? He ended up fighting Pacquiao and then Berto, and then vacating. So Amir Khan was mandatory. Danny Garcia ended up picking that title up against, his name escapes me. He fought Floyd Mayweather himself, Robert Guerrero. And Amir Khan was then mandatory for him. But in the interim, in 2015, in May, he had a fight. He had a fight against Chris Algieri, the nutritionist. Now, Chris Algieri, good commentator, very good pundit. As a boxer, he won his world title against Provodnikov in a fantastic fight, but that was at 140 pounds. Against Manny Pacquiao, he was bounced up and down off the canvas. He didn't look particularly like he belonged at welterweight. So many people felt that this fight at welterweight would favour Amir Khan because he's the one coming up in weight. He's been at that weight for longer. Amir Khan should have no problem with Chris Algieri. Well, Chris Algieri, not only did he look bigger physically than Amir Khan, he bullied Amir Khan across the ring. He done his best impression of George Foreman. Now, Amir Khan was the superior boxer and was able to pick up rounds, but it was a very close fight. It was a very close fight. Amir Khan was rocked several times, most noticeably in the first round where his legs noticeably buckled from an Algieri right hand. Now, this is the worrying thing. Chris Algieri is not known as a puncher. In fact, people make jokes that, he makes a lot of omelettes, but he has to crack the eggs across the table because he can't even break the eggs with his hand. That's how feather-fisted Chris Algieri is. And he was able to hurt Amir Khan, noticeably hurt Amir Khan several times in that fight with right hands. So that was really a worry, and Amir Khan did not look good in that fight. That fight was announced very kind of randomly. I remember it well. I think it was even announced in April that it was happening in May. So Amir Khan, in my opinion, didn't get enough preparation for it. Did he not train properly? Could be a variety of things. But Amir Khan wanted to be busy in 2015. He was not busy in 2015. He didn't have a fight until May 2016. Now, before I say who that was against, bear in mind we have Amir Khan, a welterweight who's being bullied by a light welterweight. Someone who's known to have a glass chin. At this stage it was known he had a glass chin. He was mandatory for Danny Garcia. He never avenged any of his losses. This was a good chance to avenge one of them losses, pick up a world title at welterweight in your second division. What did he do instead? He signed on to fight Canelo Alvarez. Yeah. Right. A lot of a lot of people were scratching their head when this was announced. I thought it was a joke. I thought it was like photoshopped. I didn't believe it. And then I find, yep, it's true. He's fighting Canelo Alvarez, of all people. A big punching middleweight for the middleweight world title. Now, this was at 155 pounds, has to be said. Canelo weight was what it was known back then. But still, he was fighting Canelo Alvarez. A lot of people, I'm just going to say it, were debating whether that was a good idea.
Well, it's a fairly short debate, Murray. End of message. 3 minutes to go.
Well, to be fair, as Amir Khan said, if he won, it would have been a great move. Amir Khan wasn't deluding himself about the level of task he had in front of him. He knew that he had to be punch perfect for 12 rounds. And even then, he was never guaranteed to get the decision. Well, me personally, when this fight was announced, I thought I couldn't see this fight going 3 rounds. I thought the minute Canelo lands even a semblance of a hard shot, Amir Khan would be on the ground. I actually thought he'd be stopped standing. I thought he'd be bounced off the canvas so many times that the referee would just stop it. That didn't happen. Amir Khan, as he so often does, came out firing. He came out swinging very quick. I think he kind of caught Canelo somewhat off guard. Won the first 2 rounds, but then after that, Canelo Alvarez started acclimatizing. The size difference was ridiculous. Canelo looked like a super middleweight, which he is. Amir Khan looked every bit of welterweight in there. And after 6 rounds, well, we know what happened. That was probably the worst, most devastating, most damaging knockout of Amir Khan's career. He didn't fight for 2 years after that, and I suspect he needed 2 years to recover from that knockout, because that was Canelo Alvarez. When he knocked Amir Khan out, went straight on his hands and knees. It was as if, kind of like, I don't have any brothers, but if you're playing with your little brother and you hurt him really bad, that was kind of what it was like with Canelo Alvarez when he knocked Amir Khan out. That's the best way I can describe it. So, Amir Khan, he got well paid, a couple of mil. He decides, okay, let's move on. All right, we'll take a rest, we'll reassess, we'll move on. We'll enter I'm a Celebrity. He got paid for it, I suppose, so hey, it is what it is. He did it. It's a show I've never ever watched, no intention of watching it. I don't care even if someone wants me to watch it, I ain't gonna watch it. I'd sooner go for the walk than watch that. I ain't gonna watch it. But Amir Khan went ahead and did it. Now, Amir Khan's made some silly statements in his time. People have accused him of being deluded, saying that, you can do this, you can do that, etc., etc. Well, after that Canelo Alvarez fight, you'd think Amir Khan would just kind of go and maybe be a bit quiet, maybe not do anything too silly, maybe just, enjoy his time off and then, have no kind of scandals or anything like that. Because at the time, he'd had some issues in Bolton, I think with road rage, someone trying to have a go with him and stuff. You don't need that. So come 2017, you think, it's going to be alright. There's going to be nothing wrong with Amir. He's just going to chill for this year, maybe announce a fight, and then it'd be all good. Well, he was caught doing some things over Skype, which were a bit naughty. We'll use that for YouTube, just so you know. We'll use that for YouTube. He got a nickname from Tyen Boot off that. Okay, look, Amir Khan did that, right? Look, he did it, but it's 2017. Surely that's the height of it. Surely he's just going to have a kind of reasonably normal year. Nothing major is going to happen. It's going to be fairly straightforward. Get that little thing out of the way. He's not going to say anything stupid, make any wild accusations, or anything ridiculous at all. Isn't he not? God damn it. That one right there, towards the back end of 2017, where he accused Anthony Joshua of having a liaison with his wife. I think I speak for everyone when I say that caught us all off guard. I remember watching Hatman's video on it thinking, is he trolling? Hatman, did this really happen? It did. Amir Khan admitted it himself that it happened. Anthony Joshua, what was your reaction to that?
It was good, man.
Good to know, mate. Put all that to one side. They got over that. The allegations, I think Amir Khan realised he was being a bit crazy. Him and his wife got back together, had another baby. So all's well that ends well. We'll leave it at that. You know, the silliness of Amir Khan is done. What does he do next? Now, this was kind of a head scratcher because Amir Khan, and bear in mind, Kell Brook's been calling for Amir Khan for many years at this time. Amir Khan signs a promotional deal with Eddie Hearn, Kell Brook's promoter. One of the deals that he had in place for Kell Brook if he wanted to fight him, while Kell Brook had won a world title at welterweight, by the way, was that Amir Khan will fight Kell Brook if he leaves Eddie Hearn. So why is Amir Khan signing for Eddie Hearn? Well, make it out what you will. Amir Khan had his first fight with Matchroom in April. Almost, with only about 2 weeks out of the way, almost 2 years to the date when he was knocked out by Canelo against a guy called Phil LaGreco. I myself knew Phil LaGreco, knew he wasn't that good, but 2 years out of the ring, coming off a horrible knockout loss, I thought that this fight would be trickier than it was. It wasn't for Amir Khan. He went in there, blew Phil LaGreco out and around. That was his first stoppage in several years. I think 6 years since he stopped someone. So, fair due. You know, you got to do what you got to do. You had all that adversity to get over. You did. Next fight was in September. Next fight was in September against Samuel Vargas. Now, Vargas, a fringe contender at this stage. He'd seen better days. He'd been beaten by Danny Garcia 2 years prior. Amir Khan went in there, looked to be on a similar trajectory to the Phil LaGreco fight. Had him down in the first round, looking very good, looking, sturdy. The chin. The chin did it again. He was down in the second round. Now, to be fair, Amir Khan rallied. He was able to get this win, grinded the win out, but he was hurt a few times in this fight, and again, he looked very, very vulnerable. You still had Kell Brook clamouring for this fight, but what did Amir Khan do? He decided, no, I ain't going to fight Amir Khan. I'm going to try and win a world title at welterweight. I should have had the rematch with Danny Garcia a few years ago, but I'm going to get a crack at the WBO world welterweight title against pound for pound top 5 Terence Crawford. Amir Khan has always been fixated by pound for pound. He wants that pound for pound, status. He wanted to be on the pound for pound list. He wanted to fight Terence Crawford. This was, we'll say, if not close, this is basically prime Terence Crawford. In around 2017 to kind of 2020, maybe even now, maybe not so much now, but this is prime Crawford. This didn't go well for Amir Khan. He was dropped early on in the first round, and he was getting outboxed. He got outboxed until the 6th round when, how did Virgil Hunter word it?
Well, he indicated to me that he was hitting the testicles.
He was hit low. To be fair, it was quite low. But Amir Khan, for all the heart he showed in his career, I think at this stage, the gas tank was empty. I think he'd been hurt in his career. He'd been outmanned in terms of, guys having physical strength over him. But he'd never been outboxed until he fought Terence Crawford. And I think Amir Khan, in the back of his mind, knew this fight was going to go one way. And rather than get knocked out again, I think Amir Khan decided, I'll take a rain check on this. I thought that was the end of Amir Khan. I thought we wouldn't see him in the ring again. But, amazingly, he announced the fight only 3 months later. And this was going to be in Saudi Arabia. It was kind of, to be fair, this show wasn't bad. It was actually bad, but it wasn't, it was more fun. It was a fun show to watch. This was on Channel 5. It was a show in Saudi Arabia which had Hughie Fury, Prince Patel, and Amir Khan. Amir Khan fought Billy Dib. Now, Billy Dib was a world champion at super featherweight, not at welterweight. Nowhere, it should never have even been looking at welterweight. But he went in with Amir Khan. Amir Khan stopped him in 5 rounds. It was one-sided. The size difference was ridiculous. But it was a quick turnaround for Amir Khan, and he was probably paid, this is amazing, he was probably paid more for fighting Billy Dib than he was for any other fight in his career, possibly excluding the Canelo Alvarez fight. Imagine that. Why wouldn't you do it? If you're Amir Khan, no-brainer, why wouldn't you do it? As it stands now, that's Amir Khan's last fight. Obviously, 2020 didn't help anyone. A lot of fighters were inactive in 2020. We're in 2021 now. Kell Brook has also lost to Crawford, and he lost in more devastating fashion than Amir Khan, it has to be said. I don't think we'll ever see that fight at this stage. I think both guys have... And that's the ironic thing, is it might be good now because both guys have regressed so much that it might actually be a fun fight. But I think that this fight now is never going to happen. And I think that the prime time for that fight has been and gone. And I think Amir Khan has said that he wants to come back, that he wants to make one last go of it. At the end of the day, Amir Khan is someone who's had a very tough career. He's had a lot of hard fights, took a lot of punishment in his career. Amir Khan is someone who's given me, inside the ring and outside the ring, so much entertainment. I mean, the things Amir Khan is someone who, I think Hatman coined the phrase, is almost like he's trolling the world. He just goes into a room and just he doesn't even intend to, finds a way to upset people and offend people. He is just the gift that keeps on giving, Amir Khan. Even when he talks about things, you can tell he's being serious. You kind of think, are you being a bit deluded? There was a Twitter page, I don't know if it's still going, called Deluded Khan. It's very hard to spot the difference between Deluded Khan and Amir Khan. Amir Khan, hilarious, hell of a fighter, a warrior in the ring, so much fun to watch. I enjoyed watching Amir Khan. I'm lucky that I can say I watched Amir Khan at the start of his career, the midway of his career, his prime years in the end. I think we're at the end now. I would like to see maybe Amir Khan have one more fight, maybe an easy fight, just to kind of bow out of boxing, not take at it too tough. And I'll be sad when he's gone, because I've really enjoyed Amir Khan's career. Like, talking about this has brought back some memories, and I've enjoyed it. Amir Khan, hell of a fighter. As a man, as a person, he's out there, it's fair to say. He doesn't strike me, Amir Khan, as the sharpest tool in the box. Truth be told, I'd say Amir Khan's the type of guy where if he bought a blind horse, he'd be wondering why that horse keeps running into a wall. Simple as. But still a hell of a fighter. The humour he's given all of us, the memories, the Anthony Joshua accusations especially, they're just a gift that keeps on giving, is Amir Khan. And when he is gone for good, and we know he's not coming back to boxing, I'll be sad to see him go. I enjoyed Amir Khan. The laughs, the entertainment, never ending. And I don't know if we'll ever find... Josh Taylor, in my opinion, is a better fighter than Amir Khan. You know, if you're talking about kind of comparison, Josh Taylor is better than Amir Khan. He's achieved more at 140 than Amir Khan did. But Amir Khan, he just has that personality that just captures people. I don't even think he means to. You know, and I like Josh Taylor. Even as a person, I like Josh Taylor. But Amir Khan just had that kind of goofy charisma, charm, whatever you want to call it, that just endeared people. People wanted to watch him. And some people didn't like him. And they wanted to watch him lose. They wanted to watch him get chinned. They wanted to see what he'd say after a fight. He was just the gift that kept on giving. And me personally, looking back on his career, which I just done there, I enjoyed it. And Amir Khan, should you ever watch this video, this is not a knock on you. I enjoyed watching you. And if you do come back, I wish you all the best. And if you don't, enjoy your retirement. Thanks for the memories. For now, I'm going to call it here. I hope you enjoyed taking this little trip down memory lane. Smash the like button if you did. Love doing these videos. I know a lot of people enjoyed them as well. Give me some suggestions who you'd like me to cover next time. And we're going to ask, what the fuck happened? What the fuck happened to Amir Khan? A lot of things happened. And a lot of things gave us good memories. For now, I'll talk to you. Peace.